Some people are just meant to follow, sweetheart. There's no shame in that. My father's words hung in the humid Georgia air like morning fog that refuses to lift. It was Thanksgiving 2019, and I was 23, sitting on the porch swing of our family's modest ranch house in Columbus. The peeling white paint on the railings caught the afternoon light, casting shadows that seemed to dance with my uncertainty. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. He'd said it after I told him about my application to officer candidate school. Said it with the same gentle tone he used when explaining why I couldn't have a pony when I was 8. Or why I shouldn't try out for varsity soccer in high school. Always protective. Always limiting. Always convinced he knew my ceiling better than I did. The Garrett family had a rhythm, a hierarchy as predictable as Sunday service at First Baptist. Dad was the steady foundation, 26 years in the Army, retired as a master sergeant with more commendations than wall space. Mom was the organizer, the one who kept photo albums in chronological order and never missed a school board meeting. And then there was Derek, my younger brother by 18 months, who seemed to absorb excellence like a sponge absorbs water. Derek had been the golden child since he could walk. Star quarterback in high school, valedictorian, full scholarship to Georgia Military College. Everything he touched turned to achievement, and our parents glowed in his reflected light like moths drawn to a bonfire. When he announced his intention to join the Marines, Dad practically burst with pride. When I mentioned my own military aspirations, I got lectures about realistic expectations and playing to your strengths. My strengths, according to the family consensus, were being reliable, helpful, and supportive. I was the one who remembered everyone's birthdays, who stayed home during college breaks to help Mom with her catering business, who listened patiently while Derek recounted his latest triumph. I was the auxiliary member of the Garrett success story, present but not central, appreciated but not celebrated. The defining moment had come 3 years earlier, during my sophomore year at the University of Georgia. I'd been studying international relations with a focus on conflict resolution, maintaining a 3.8 GPA while working part-time to pay for books and expenses. It wasn't flashy like Derek's football career, but it was solid progress toward my goals. That spring, I'd been selected for a competitive internship with a nonprofit organization that worked with refugee resettlement. It was unpaid, but the experience would have been invaluable, working directly with families displaced by conflict, helping coordinate resources, translating when needed since I'd been studying Arabic on my own. I was excited about the opportunity to finally apply my studies to real-world problems. But then Derek's girlfriend at the time had a family crisis. Her mother was diagnosed with cancer, and she needed support during treatment. Without consulting me, my parents volunteered my services. They explained that the internship was just an unpaid position anyway, while helping Sarah's family was what good people do. They made it sound like choosing between selfishness and compassion, between my ambitions and basic human decency. I took the summer job at Mom's catering company instead, spending 3 months arranging centerpieces and serving sweet tea at wedding receptions, while my classmates gained experience that would shape their careers. Derek spent that same summer at an elite training camp for prospective military officers, networking with future leaders and building the foundation for his eventual commission. When I graduated, I'd applied to several international aid organizations and government agencies. The responses were polite, but consistent. They needed candidates with more field experience, more practical application of their academic training. The internship I'd given up would have provided exactly that foundation. Instead, I found myself back in Columbus, working as a substitute teacher and wondering if Dad had been right about my limitations all along. The family narrative crystallized around Derek's success and my struggles. At family gatherings, conversations naturally gravitated toward his achievements, his promotion to Lance Corporal, his selection for specialized training, his commendations for leadership during joint exercises. When relatives asked about my plans, Mom would smile tightly and say I was still figuring things out, as if my uncertainty was a temporary condition that would eventually resolve itself into something appropriately modest. Derek never meant to overshadow me. He was genuinely kind, always offering to help with my job applications or put in a good word with his military contacts. But his offers felt like charity, like the successful sibling extending a hand to pull the struggling one up to a more respectable level. Even his generosity reinforced the family's understanding of our respective places in the hierarchy. The worst part wasn't the lack of recognition, it was the subtle but persistent message that my aspirations were fundamentally unrealistic. When I mentioned wanting to work in international diplomacy, Mom would suggest I consider becoming a teacher instead, since I enjoyed working with people. When I talked about my interest in conflict resolution, Dad would redirect the conversation toward more practical careers like social work or administration. They weren't trying to be cruel. They thought they were protecting me from disappointment by encouraging me to aim lower. By the time I turned 25, I'd internalized their limitations. I stopped mentioning my larger ambitions and focused on finding stable, respectable work that wouldn't challenge anyone's expectations. I took a position as an administrative assistant at the local VA office, processing paperwork and scheduling appointments for veterans seeking benefits. It was meaningful work in its own way, but it felt like wearing clothes that didn't quite fit, functional but constraining. The family celebrated my steady employment with the same enthusiasm they might show for a participation trophy. Finally, their uncertain daughter had found her place in a role that suited her temperament and capabilities. Mom started introducing me to friends as someone who helps our veterans, which made the work sound both noble and appropriately limited in scope. Derek, meanwhile, had been selected for Marine Corps Intelligence School and was rapidly climbing the ranks. His letters home were filled with descriptions of advanced training exercises, international deployments, and increasing responsibilities. He was becoming everything our parents had hoped for in a military child: disciplined, accomplished, and destined for leadership. During family dinners, I found myself fading into the background as conversations swirled around Derek's latest achievements and future prospects. I developed a talent for asking the right questions to keep others talking, deflecting attention from my own stagnant situation, while appearing engaged and supportive. It was easier than trying to compete for space in a narrative that had already been written without a starring role for me. The final confirmation of my place in the family hierarchy came during Derek's promotion ceremony to sergeant. I'd driven down to Camp Lejeune for the event, wearing my best dress and carrying a camera to capture the moment for our parents' ever-growing collection of Derek memorabilia. As we stood in the receiving line afterward, one of his superior officers made polite conversation about family connections to the military. "Any other Marines in the family?" the captain asked, glancing between me and our parents. "Just Derek," Dad replied without hesitation. "Though his sister here works with veterans through the VA, she's very dedicated to supporting our servicemen and women." The captain nodded politely and moved on, but the dismissal stung more than I expected. I wasn't even considered adjacent to military service. I was simply a civilian who happened to work in a related field. My own aspirations, my years of studying international relations and conflict resolution, my deep knowledge of military history and strategy, none of it registered as relevant or notable. Standing there in my carefully chosen outfit, holding a camera to document someone else's achievement, I felt the weight of all the roads not taken. The internships declined, the applications withdrawn, the dreams downsized to fit other people's expectations. I had become exactly what my family expected, a reliable supporting character in Derek's success story, content to cheer from the sidelines and find fulfillment in other people's accomplishments. That night, alone in my hotel room, I stared at the photos I'd taken of Derek receiving his stripes. In every shot, he looked confident and capable, surrounded by fellow Marines who clearly respected his abilities. He belonged in that world in a way I never seemed to belong anywhere. For the first time, I wondered if my family had been right all along. Maybe some people really were meant to follow, and maybe accepting that truth was the key to finding peace with my limitations. But as I scrolled through the images, something else caught my attention. In the background of one photo, barely visible, was a bulletin board covered with announcements and notices. One small poster advertised opportunities for civilian specialists in military intelligence, positions for individuals with language skills, cultural knowledge, and analytical capabilities. People like me, if I'd been brave enough to pursue the path I'd originally envisioned. I closed the phone and lay back on the narrow hotel bed, listening to the sounds of base life continuing outside my window. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the rhythmic cadence of Marines running their evening PT, their voices unified in purpose and direction. For just a moment, I allowed myself to imagine what it might have felt like to be among them, not as Derek's supportive sister, or as a civilian employee grateful for stable work, but as someone who belonged in that world of discipline and achievement. Then I pushed the thought away, as I'd learned to do with all the dreams that no longer seemed to fit the person my family saw when they looked at me. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, buried between spam advertisements and routine work correspondence. The subject line was innocuous enough: Contractor Consultation, Project Nightingale. I almost deleted it, assuming it was another automated message about VA system updates or training requirements. But the sender's address caught my attention: d.morrison@dia.mil, Defense Intelligence Agency. Military intelligence didn't typically reach out to administrative assistants at local VA offices, especially not with cryptic project names and requests for immediate secure communication. I opened the message in my small cubicle, surrounded by the familiar sounds of ringing phones and clicking keyboards. My coworkers were absorbed in their own tasks, processing disability claims, scheduling medical appointments, fielding calls from frustrated veterans, navigating bureaucratic mazes. None of them noticed as I read the brief message that would crack open the carefully constructed limitations of my ordinary life. Ms. Garrett, your linguistic analysis on the Al-Rashid documentation has been invaluable to our current operation. We require additional consultation on similar materials. Please respond using secure channels only, time sensitive. Al-Rashid documentation. I hadn't heard that phrase in over 2 years, not since I'd submitted what I thought was a routine translation request through the VA's support network. A veteran had brought in documents he'd recovered during his deployment: family letters, personal papers, fragments of civilian life caught in the chaos of conflict. He'd wanted them translated before returning them to the International Red Cross for reunification efforts. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The papers had been in Arabic, with dialectical variations that suggested origins in rural Syria. Most translation services would have provided basic conversions, turning the words into English without capturing the cultural nuances, the emotional undertones, the subtle indicators of the writer's social status and educational background. But I'd spent years studying not just the language, but the cultural context, the historical frameworks that shaped how people in that region expressed grief, hope, and resilience. My translation had included detailed annotations about the document's likely provenance, analysis of the relationship dynamics between the letter writers, and contextual notes about the social and political conditions referenced in the personal communications. I'd treated it like an academic exercise, applying everything I'd learned about conflict analysis and cultural interpretation to bring depth and accuracy to the translation. I'd submitted the work through the VA's network and assumed it had been filed away in some database, another small contribution to the massive machinery of veteran services. I never imagined that someone in military intelligence had flagged my analysis as noteworthy, or that my detailed cultural insights had been circulated beyond the local office. The secure communication system required multiple authentication steps and encryption protocols I'd never encountered before. As I navigated the login process, I realized this wasn't the kind of casual consultation request typically sent to civilian contractors. This was serious, classified work that suggested my linguistic skills had earned attention at levels of government I'd never imagined accessing. Over the following weeks, working from my apartment after regular VA office hours, I found myself translating and analyzing documents that painted complex pictures of international situations I recognized from academic study but had never engaged with professionally. Intercepted communications between regional militia leaders, personal correspondence recovered from conflict zones, intelligence reports that required not just linguistic conversion but cultural interpretation and strategic analysis. Each assignment came with increasingly sophisticated security protocols and higher classification levels. I wasn't just translating words. I was decoding cultural meanings, identifying social networks, analyzing communication patterns that revealed organizational structures and operational intentions. The work required exactly the combination of language skills, cultural knowledge, and analytical thinking I'd developed through years of academic study and personal research. The feedback was consistently positive, but I never spoke with anyone directly. Communication happened through secure messaging systems, encrypted file transfers, and digital dead drops that maintained operational security while allowing for detailed collaboration. I began to understand that I was part of a larger analytical network, contributing specialized expertise to intelligence operations that spanned multiple agencies and international partnerships. My day job at the VA office continued unchanged. I processed paperwork, answered phones, and maintained the pleasant, helpful demeanor that had earned praise from supervisors and colleagues. No one suspected that the quiet administrative assistant who brought homemade cookies to office birthday parties was spending her evenings analyzing classified intelligence documents and providing cultural expertise to military operations. Hell, the contrast between my two lives became increasingly surreal. During the day, I listened to coworkers discuss weekend plans and television shows, offering opinions on restaurants and movie recommendations, while internally processing analysis requests about geopolitical situations that would shape international policy decisions. I became an expert at compartmentalization, switching between my public persona as a supportive VA employee and my private identity as a specialized intelligence contractor. The work expanded gradually: cultural briefings for diplomatic missions, analysis of social media communications from regions experiencing political instability, consultation on humanitarian aid distribution strategies that required understanding of local power structures and cultural sensitivities. Each assignment built on previous work, creating a portfolio of expertise that I couldn't share with anyone in my personal life. My bank account reflected the reality of my dual existence. The VA salary covered basic living expenses, but the intelligence contracting work paid rates that reflected its specialized nature and security requirements. I found myself able to afford things that had once seemed beyond reach: a reliable car, a larger apartment, professional development courses that enhanced my analytical capabilities. But I couldn't explain the improvements to my family without revealing work that was bound by security clearances and non-disclosure agreements. When Mom commented on my new laptop or Dad noticed my upgraded apartment, I deflected with vague references to some freelance translation work or extra hours at the office. They assumed I'd finally started applying myself more diligently to the modest career path they'd always envisioned for me. The psychological challenge of maintaining secrecy was more difficult than the intellectual demands of the work itself. I'd found professional fulfillment and recognition in exactly the field I'd originally hoped to enter, but I couldn't share that success with the people whose approval I'd spent years seeking. Derek continued to be the family's military success story, while I remained the supportive sister who'd found stable work helping veterans, a narrative that became increasingly disconnected from my actual professional identity. Late nights became my refuge. After submitting analysis reports and encrypted communications to handlers I'd never met, I would sit by my apartment window and allow myself to feel the satisfaction of meaningful work. I was contributing to operations that protected American interests and international stability. My cultural insights were influencing policy decisions and strategic planning at levels of government that operated far beyond my family's understanding of my capabilities. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd finally achieved the kind of professional engagement I'd always wanted: work that combined my academic training with real-world impact, that challenged my analytical abilities while contributing to larger purposes. But the secrecy requirements meant that my success remained invisible to the people whose recognition I'd once craved. During family dinners, I found myself listening to Derek's stories about his Marine Corps experiences with a new perspective. His achievements were impressive and worthy of celebration, but they represented just one dimension of military service. My work operated in different spaces: the analytical realm, where cultural understanding and linguistic expertise shaped strategic decisions before they reached operational levels. I began to realize that my family's narrow definition of military achievement had blinded them to other forms of valuable service. They celebrated Derek's visible accomplishments while remaining unaware that their unsuccessful daughter was contributing to national security through specialized expertise that required years of education and cultural study to develop effectively. The transformation was gradual but profound. I stopped seeking external validation for my professional identity and found confidence in the classified feedback that praised my analytical insights and cultural expertise. I learned to derive satisfaction from meaningful work that served important purposes, even if that satisfaction had to remain private. By the end of my second year as an intelligence contractor, I'd developed a reputation within certain circles as a reliable analyst with specialized expertise in Middle Eastern cultural dynamics and linguistic analysis. My handlers began requesting longer-term assignments and more complex analytical projects that suggested growing trust in my capabilities and judgment. The work wasn't just intellectually fulfilling, it was exactly the kind of international engagement I'd originally envisioned when studying conflict resolution and cultural analysis. I was finally using my education and skills in ways that made meaningful differences, even if those differences had to remain invisible to the people who'd once discouraged my ambitions. The invitation arrived on cream-colored cardstock with embossed gold lettering, the kind of formal stationery reserved for life's most significant moments. Lieutenant Colonel Derek Michael Garrett cordially invites you to attend his promotion ceremony and reception. The date was circled in red ink with Mom's handwriting. Family photo at 1,600 hours, dress appropriately. I held the invitation in my hands, feeling its weight both literally and figuratively. Derek had made lieutenant colonel at 26, a meteoric rise that would cement his status as the family's military prodigy. The ceremony was scheduled for Fort Moore, the sprawling Georgia installation that had been renamed from Fort Benning just 2 years earlier. It would be a gathering of high-ranking officers, military dignitaries, and family members celebrating Derek's ascension to field-grade officer status. The timing couldn't have been worse. I was 3 days into my most complex intelligence assignment yet, a multifaceted analysis of communication patterns from a developing crisis in the Eastern Mediterranean. The project involved coordinating with assets across 4 different agencies, synthesizing intelligence from multiple sources, and preparing briefing materials for senior policymakers. My handlers had emphasized the time-sensitive nature of the work and the high-level attention it was receiving from Pentagon leadership. But missing Derek's promotion ceremony wasn't an option. Mom had made that clear in our phone conversation 2 weeks earlier, when she'd called to ensure I would request time off from my little VA job to attend the family's most important military milestone. She'd spoken with the presumptuous authority of someone accustomed to arranging other people's priorities around Derek's achievements. I sat in my apartment that evening, staring at the formal invitation while encrypted communication requests pulsed on my secure laptop. The juxtaposition felt symbolic. Derek's public triumph demanding my presence while my private professional life required immediate attention to matters that would likely influence international policy decisions. I was being pulled between 2 incompatible versions of myself: the supportive sister expected to witness Derek's success, and the specialized analyst whose expertise was needed for urgent national security matters. The solution came through a compromise that satisfied neither role completely. I negotiated with my intelligence handlers to front-load the most critical analysis components, working 18-hour days to complete preliminary assessments that could be transmitted before the ceremony. I arranged for secure communication capabilities during my travel to Georgia, establishing protocols that would allow me to maintain operational continuity while fulfilling family obligations. The preparation felt like planning a covert mission within my own life. I researched the guest list for Derek's ceremony, identifying attendees whose backgrounds suggested possible intelligence community connections. I memorized cover stories that would explain my presence without revealing my security clearances. I prepared responses to the inevitable questions about my work, crafting answers that would satisfy family curiosity without compromising operational security. My wardrobe choice required strategic consideration. The dress needed to be appropriate for a formal military ceremony while avoiding anything that might suggest capabilities beyond my assumed role as a civilian administrative worker. I selected a conservative navy blue dress with minimal jewelry, aiming for the kind of respectful invisibility that would allow me to blend into the background of Derek's celebration. The drive to Fort Moore took 4 hours through rural Georgia countryside that gradually gave way to the sprawling infrastructure of one of the Army's largest installations. As I approached the main gate, I felt the familiar tension of crossing between my civilian cover identity and the military world, where my hidden expertise had earned recognition I couldn't publicly claim. Base security procedures had intensified since my last visit 2 years earlier. The military police officer who checked my identification scrutinized my credentials with thorough professionalism, running background checks that would reveal my civilian employment but not my classified contracting work. I maintained casual conversation about the ceremony while internally monitoring my responses for operational security compliance. The guest quarters where family members were staying buzzed with pre-ceremony activity. Mom had transformed the common area into a coordination center, complete with printed schedules, seating charts, and detailed instructions for the day's events. She moved through the space with military precision, directing relatives and coordinating logistics with the efficiency of someone accustomed to managing complex family operations. Derek appeared periodically between official preparations, looking every inch the successful Marine officer in his dress blue uniform. The silver oak leaves of his new rank caught the afternoon light as he moved between conversations with visiting relatives and fellow officers. He carried himself with the confident bearing of someone who had never doubted his place in the military hierarchy. "Sarah's here," Mom announced as I entered the main gathering area. She gestured toward the corner where I should deposit my overnight bag, barely pausing in her coordination activities to acknowledge my arrival. "Derek's speech is at 1,900 hours. Make sure you're in the front row for photos." The assumption that I would automatically occupy a subordinate role in the evening's documentation reflected the family's established hierarchy. I would be positioned as audience rather than participant, witness rather than achiever, supporting cast in Derek's starring performance. The expectation was so ingrained that no one considered whether I might have professional obligations that complicated my availability for extended photo sessions. That evening, I received an encrypted message that changed everything. The Eastern Mediterranean situation had escalated dramatically. Intelligence indicated possible hostile action against American diplomatic facilities within 48 hours. My analysis had been flagged as crucial for understanding the cultural and political factors that might influence local response to crisis intervention strategies. The message included a priority directive: prepare for possible emergency consultation with senior Pentagon leadership, maintain communication availability for real-time analytical support, be prepared to provide cultural briefings for operational planning teams within 6 hours of notification. I stared at the secure communication device, feeling the weight of 2 incompatible demands. My family expected unwavering attention to Derek's ceremonial triumph. My handlers needed immediate availability for operational support that could influence American lives and international stability. The collision between my public role and private expertise had reached a crisis point that would force choices I'd spent years avoiding. The hotel room felt smaller as I paced between the window overlooking the base parade grounds and the desk where my encrypted communications equipment waited for the next priority message. Outside, I could see Marines conducting evening formations, their synchronized movements reflecting the discipline and precision that Derek embodied in his military career. But I also knew things about military operations that Derek had never encountered in his conventional Marine Corps experience. I understood the intelligence frameworks that shaped strategic decisions before they reached field commanders. I possessed cultural expertise that influenced policy at levels of government that operated beyond traditional military hierarchies. The irony was profound. Tomorrow, I would sit in the audience watching my younger brother receive recognition for achievements that our family considered the pinnacle of military success. Meanwhile, I would be monitoring secure communications for analytical requests that could influence decisions affecting international stability and American security interests. My phone buzzed with a text from Derek. "Thanks for coming, sis. It means everything to have family here." The message was genuine and heartfelt, reflecting the brother who had always been kind despite our different trajectories. He had no way of knowing that his supportive sister possessed security clearances and analytical expertise that might soon be needed for urgent operational support. I typed back, "Wouldn't miss it, so proud of you." The response was honest within the constraints of my cover identity. I was proud of Derek's achievements, even as I wrestled with the growing contradiction between my family's perception of my capabilities and the reality of my professional responsibilities. The secure device chimed again, another priority message, another request for analytical expertise that couldn't wait for convenient timing. I was about to discover whether my carefully maintained double life could survive the collision between family expectations and national security obligations. As I prepared for sleep in the unfamiliar hotel room, I realized that tomorrow's ceremony would be more than Derek's promotion celebration. It would be the moment when my two incompatible lives converged in ways that might finally force the truth into the open, regardless of the personal costs or professional complications that revelation might create. The Officers' Club at Fort Moore carried the scent of polished wood and military tradition. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in crisp white linens, while portraits of distinguished commanders lined the walls in silent testimony to decades of service and sacrifice. The pre-ceremony reception buzzed with conversations between uniformed officers and their families, a carefully orchestrated social gathering that preceded the formal promotion ceremony. I stood near the refreshment table, holding a glass of sparkling cider and trying to blend into the background. My navy dress felt appropriate but unremarkable among the assembly of military wives in cocktail attire and officers in dress uniforms. The conversations around me flowed with the easy familiarity of people who shared common experiences and understood military culture from the inside. "Sarah, come meet Colonel Peterson," Mom called from across the room, beckoning me toward a distinguished-looking officer with silver eagles on his shoulders. "He's Derek's commanding officer." I approached with the practiced smile I'd perfected during years of family gatherings, extending my hand for the polite introduction that would position me as the supportive civilian sister grateful for her brother's achievements. "Pleasure to meet you, Colonel," I said, maintaining appropriate eye contact and the deferential tone expected from family members. "Your brother is exceptional," Peterson replied, his handshake firm and brief. "We're fortunate to have officers of his caliber in the Corps. And you work with veterans, I understand?" "At the VA office in Columbus," I confirmed, delivering the response I'd rehearsed countless times: "Administrative support for veterans services." Peterson nodded approvingly. "Important work. Our veterans deserve dedicated support as they transition back to civilian life." The conversation continued for several minutes, touching on Derek's leadership qualities and future potential within the Marine Corps. I offered appropriate responses about my brother's dedication and our family's pride in his service, playing my assigned role as the admiring sibling who understood military life from a respectful distance. But as Peterson described Derek's recent operational successes, I found myself listening with analytical ears that recognized gaps in the strategic framework he outlined. The mission parameters he mentioned suggested incomplete intelligence assessment and cultural misunderstandings that could have been avoided with proper regional expertise. I bit my tongue against the impulse to offer insights that would reveal knowledge beyond my supposed civilian background. "Sarah's always been supportive," Mom interjected, placing her hand on my arm with possessive pride. "She's found her niche helping our servicemen, even if she couldn't serve herself." The dismissal stung more than I expected. Mom's tone carried the gentle condescension of someone explaining why a child couldn't participate in adult activities. The phrase "couldn't serve herself" hung in the air like an indictment of my capabilities, a public acknowledgement of limitations that had been privately reinforced for years. Colonel Peterson's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a flicker of polite sympathy for the family member who lacked the qualifications for military service but had found appropriate ways to contribute from the margins. He nodded with the kind understanding reserved for well-meaning civilians who supported the military without truly comprehending its complexities. "Every form of service matters," he said diplomatically, before excusing himself to speak with other guests. I watched him walk away, knowing that his assessment of my capabilities had been shaped by assumptions that bore no relationship to my actual qualifications or experience. To Colonel Peterson, I was Derek's civilian sister who processed paperwork at a local VA office, earnest but limited, supportive but irrelevant to serious military affairs. The irony burned like acid in my throat. 3 hours earlier, I'd submitted an intelligence analysis that would likely reach Peterson's desk within days, probably influencing operational decisions for Marine units under his command. My cultural expertise and strategic insights were valued by Pentagon planners who relied on my assessments for mission planning in exactly the regions where Peterson's Marines operated. But here, in this social setting, I was invisible in ways that transcended simple oversight. I was categorically excluded from conversations about military strategy and international operations, dismissed as someone whose understanding of such matters would necessarily be superficial and uninformed. "There's our rising star," a voice boomed from behind me. I turned to see Uncle Frank, Dad's younger brother, approaching with his usual bombastic enthusiasm. Frank had served as an Army sergeant during the 1990s and considered himself an expert on all matters military, despite a career that had never progressed beyond routine logistics assignments. "Heard Derek's getting the silver leaves," Frank continued, slapping me on the shoulder with fraternal familiarity. "Boys going places, that's for sure. Not like when we were coming up. Had to wait years for promotion opportunities." I nodded politely while Frank launched into a detailed comparison between current Marine Corps advancement timelines and his own military experience 2 decades earlier. His analysis contained several factual errors about modern promotion requirements and demonstrated fundamental misunderstandings about how officer career progression actually worked in contemporary military branches. Under normal circumstances, I would have smiled and deflected, allowing Frank to enjoy his role as the family's military authority without challenging his assertions. But tonight, listening to him confidently misstate basic facts about military personnel policies, I felt the weight of accumulated silence pressing against my professional integrity. "Actually," I began carefully, "the promotion timeline for field-grade officers has been restructured since 2018. The new system emphasizes operational experience and specialized training rather than simple time and grade requirements." Frank paused mid-sentence, looking at me with surprise and slight irritation. "Well, I suppose you might have picked up some information working at the VA office," he said dismissively. "But the real changes come from actually serving, being in the thick of things." The correction had been mild and factual, but Frank's response revealed the deeper assumptions that governed family interactions. My knowledge, regardless of its accuracy or depth, was automatically categorized as second-hand information gathered from civilian employment. Frank's outdated and incorrect understanding carried more weight because it derived from personal military experience, however limited and distant. "Sarah's become quite the little military expert since working with veterans," Mom said, arriving to hear the tail end of our conversation. Her tone carried fond amusement, as if my interest in military affairs was a charming hobby rather than professional expertise. The word "little" echoed in my mind as relatives gathered around Derek for another round of congratulatory photographs. I was the little military expert, the younger sister who had found a little niche supporting veterans through administrative work. Every description of my capabilities included qualifying diminutives that reinforced my subordinate status within the family's military hierarchy. As the reception continued, I found myself relegated to the familiar role of family photographer and logistics coordinator. I held purses during formal introductions, adjusted ties for group photos, and made sure elderly relatives had comfortable seating arrangements. The duties felt automatic after years of practice, but tonight they chafed against my growing awareness of the contradiction between my actual capabilities and my assigned family function. Derek moved through the crowd with easy confidence, accepting congratulations and sharing stories about his recent training exercises. He commanded attention naturally, his presence drawing circles of interested listeners who hung on his descriptions of military life and operational challenges. He was everything our family had hoped for in a military representative: articulate, accomplished, and genuinely worthy of the recognition he was receiving. But as I watched him field questions about military strategy and international operations, I recognized the limitations of his perspective. Derek's experience, impressive as it was, focused on tactical execution rather than strategic planning. He understood how to lead Marines in operational environments, but had limited exposure to the intelligence frameworks and cultural analysis that shaped those operational parameters at higher levels. The guests treating Derek as their primary source of military insight had no way of knowing that his supposedly civilian sister possessed strategic knowledge that complemented and often exceeded his tactical expertise. They couldn't see past the surface narrative that positioned him as the family's military authority, and me as a supportive but marginal figure whose contributions operated safely outside the realm of serious military affairs. My secure communication device vibrated discreetly in my evening bag. Another priority message from handlers who valued my expertise enough to interrupt family obligations. I excused myself to the restroom, where I could read the encrypted update about the developing Eastern Mediterranean situation. The message was brief but urgent. Cultural assessment requested for immediate operational planning. Regional specialist consultation required within 2 hours. Prepare for secure briefing at 2,100 hours. I stared at the message, feeling the weight of competing loyalties. Derek's formal ceremony would begin in 90 minutes, followed by a family dinner that Mom had been planning for weeks. My handlers needed immediate analytical support for operational decisions that could affect American personnel in hostile territory. The bathroom mirror reflected a woman caught between incompatible identities, the supportive sister expected to witness family triumph, and the strategic analyst whose expertise was needed for urgent national security matters. In a few hours, one of those identities would have to take precedence over the other, potentially forcing revelations that would shatter carefully maintained illusions about my capabilities and place within the family structure. The ceremony hall at Fort Moore had been transformed into a showcase of Marine Corps tradition. Flags representing decades of distinguished service flanked the raised platform where Derek would receive his silver oak leaves. The assembled crowd of nearly 200 guests filled rows of precisely arranged chairs, their conversations creating a respectful murmur that underscored the significance of the evening's formal proceedings. I sat in the third row, positioned where Mom had designated family seating, but far enough back to avoid prominence in the official photographs. My secure device had been vibrating intermittently throughout the opening remarks, each pulse a reminder of the urgent intelligence requirements competing for my attention. I'd managed to send a brief encrypted response confirming my availability for the priority briefing, but the timing remained impossible to reconcile with family obligations. Brigadier General Martinez took the podium with the commanding presence that marked decades of distinguished service. His introduction of Derek emphasized leadership qualities, tactical innovation, and the kind of strategic thinking that identified future Marine Corps leaders. The praise was well-deserved. Derek had genuinely excelled in every assignment and demonstrated the capabilities that justified his accelerated promotion timeline. Lieutenant Colonel Garrett represents the finest traditions of Marine Corps leadership, General Martinez declared, his voice carrying across the silent assembly. His operational expertise and dedication to mission success exemplify the values we expect from our field-grade officers. Derek stood at attention beside the platform, his dress blue uniform immaculate, and his bearing reflecting years of military discipline. He looked every inch the successful Marine officer, and I felt genuine pride in his achievements, despite the growing tension between my public role as supportive sister and my private identity as a strategic intelligence analyst. But as General Martinez continued his remarks about Derek's recent operational successes, I noticed something that made my breath catch. He was describing mission parameters from Operation Crescent Dawn, a classified Marine Corps deployment that I'd provided cultural analysis for 6 months earlier. My intelligence briefings had shaped the strategic framework that made Derek's tactical successes possible. The irony was staggering. Derek was receiving recognition for operational achievements that had been enabled by my classified analytical work. He'd led Marines through complex cultural terrain that I'd helped map through detailed intelligence assessments. His tactical innovations had been informed by strategic insights that originated from my expertise in regional politics and social dynamics. The lieutenant colonel's ability to navigate complex tribal relationships during the Helmand Province mission reflected exceptional cultural awareness, General Martinez continued, unknowingly describing operational success that had been built on my classified cultural briefings. I sat motionless while my family beamed with pride at Derek's accomplishments, none of them realizing that their supposedly unsuccessful daughter had contributed foundational intelligence that made those accomplishments possible. The classified nature of my work meant that Derek himself might not know the analytical framework that had supported his mission planning. My secure device pulsed again, more insistently this time. I glanced down discreetly and saw a message marked Urgent. Immediate response required. The Eastern Mediterranean crisis had escalated beyond preliminary assessment requirements. Pentagon leadership needed real-time analytical support for decisions that would be implemented within hours. I was trying to formulate a response when I heard footsteps approaching from the rear of the ceremony hall. A Marine captain in dress uniform walked purposefully down the center aisle, his expression serious and his destination clearly the front of the room. The unusual interruption caused heads to turn and conversations to pause as guests noticed the breach of ceremonial protocol. The captain approached General Martinez and spoke quietly in his ear. Martinez's expression shifted from ceremonial formality to sharp attention as he listened to whatever urgent communication had interrupted Derek's promotion ceremony. After a brief exchange, Martinez nodded and the captain retreated to a position near the side wall. "Ladies and gentlemen," General Martinez announced, his tone carrying new authority, "we have a distinguished guest in our assembly this evening. I've just been informed that we're honored by the presence of Dr. Sarah Garrett, Senior Analytical Consultant to the Defense Intelligence Agency." The words hit the assembly like a physical force. Heads turned in coordinated confusion as guests searched for this mysterious, distinguished visitor who had somehow appeared unnoticed among the family members and friends gathered to celebrate Derek's promotion. "Dr. Garrett," General Martinez continued, his voice now carrying the weight of revelation, "would you please join us at the front?" The silence that followed was absolute. 200 people sat frozen, while the implications of the general's words penetrated their understanding. Derek's face had gone pale, his eyes searching the crowd with growing comprehension and disbelief. Mom's mouth was slightly open, her careful composure cracking as she processed information that contradicted everything she thought she knew about her daughter. I stood slowly, feeling every eye in the room tracking my movement. The walk to the front of the ceremony hall felt like crossing a minefield, where each step might detonate assumptions that had shaped family relationships for decades. My hands were steady, but my heart was pounding with the realization that my carefully maintained double life was disintegrating in real time. "Dr. Garrett," General Martinez said as I reached the platform, "I understand you're needed for urgent consultation regarding the developing situation in the Eastern Mediterranean. Your cultural analysis has been specifically requested by Pentagon leadership for immediate operational planning." The formal acknowledgement hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. Dad's face had gone through several color changes as he struggled to reconcile his image of his unsuccessful daughter with the reality of a senior intelligence consultant whose expertise was needed for urgent national security matters. Uncle Frank looked like he'd been struck by lightning, his earlier dismissal of my military knowledge now revealed as spectacular misjudgment. "Thank you, General," I replied, my voice carrying the professional confidence that I'd developed through years of classified briefings and high-stakes analytical work. "I can provide the required consultation immediately if secure communication facilities are available." The transformation in how people looked at me was instantaneous and complete. Officers who had politely dismissed me as Derek's civilian sister now regarded me with the respect reserved for senior intelligence personnel. Family members who had spent years reinforcing my subordinate status sat stunned as they recalculated every assumption they'd made about my capabilities and professional standing. Derek found his voice first. "Sarah?" he said, the word carrying confusion, admiration, and a hint of something that might have been betrayal. You've been working for the DIA?" "For the past 3 years," I confirmed, meeting his eyes directly. "Cultural analysis and strategic intelligence assessment, primarily focused on Middle Eastern regional dynamics and operational support." The captain who had delivered the initial message stepped forward. "Ma'am, if you're ready, we have secure communication equipment prepared in the adjacent briefing room. Pentagon leadership is standing by for your assessment." I nodded, then turned back to Derek. "Congratulations on your promotion, Lieutenant Colonel. You've earned every bit of the recognition you're receiving tonight." The words were genuine, but they carried new weight. I was no longer the supportive civilian sister offering admiration from the margins. I was a senior intelligence professional acknowledging the achievements of a fellow service member whose operational successes had been enabled by analytical frameworks that I'd helped develop. As I walked toward the briefing room to provide urgent intelligence support that would influence immediate Pentagon decisions, I heard the buzz of shocked conversations erupting behind me. Family members and guests were struggling to process the revelation that Derek's supposedly unsuccessful sister was actually a senior government analyst, whose expertise was valued at the highest levels of national security planning. They mentioned. Mom's voice cut through the noise, sharp with disbelief. But she works at the VA office. Cover employment, I heard General Martinez explain patiently. Many of our senior intelligence personnel maintain civilian positions that provide operational security for their classified work. The door closed behind me as I entered the secure briefing room, but I could still hear the excited conversations and confused questions from family members who were discovering that their understanding of my life had been fundamentally wrong for years. Derek's promotion ceremony had become the backdrop for a revelation that would force everyone to recalculate their assumptions about my capabilities, my achievements, and my place within both the family and the broader world of military service. For the first time in years, my professional identity and my personal life had collided in ways that made continued deception impossible. The careful compartmentalization that had allowed me to maintain family relationships while pursuing meaningful work was permanently shattered, replaced by a new reality where my actual capabilities could no longer be hidden or dismissed. The secure briefing room hummed with electronic equipment designed to facilitate classified communications across global networks. I spent 45 minutes providing real-time cultural analysis to Pentagon planners, my expertise shaping operational decisions that would be implemented within hours. The work required intense concentration, synthesizing intelligence from multiple sources while considering political nuances that could determine mission success or failure. But even as I focused on urgent analytical requirements, part of my mind wrestled with the personal implications of what had just occurred. 26 years of carefully maintained family dynamics had been obliterated in a single moment of professional recognition. There would be no returning to the comfortable fiction that I was Derek's supportive but unsuccessful sister, who had found modest fulfillment in administrative work. When I emerged from the briefing room, the ceremony hall had largely emptied. A few clusters of guests lingered near the reception area, their conversations animated by the evening's unexpected revelation. I could see family members gathered in a tight circle near the front of the room, their body language suggesting intense discussion punctuated by frequent glances in my direction. Derek approached first, still wearing his dress uniform but with the relaxed posture of someone who had completed his formal obligations. His expression was complex, pride mixed with confusion, admiration tempered by something that might have been hurt or betrayal. 3 years, he said without preamble. You've been doing this work for 3 years and you never said anything. I met his eyes directly. I couldn't say anything. Security clearances come with non-disclosure requirements that don't make exceptions for family relationships. But all those times. Derek paused, running his hand through his hair in a gesture I recognized from childhood moments of frustration. All those times you asked about my work, acted interested in military operations. You probably knew more about strategic planning than I did. The accusation stung because it contained enough truth to be uncomfortable. I had asked questions about Derek's experiences, partly from genuine interest in his career, but also to maintain my cover as a curious civilian sister. The deception had felt necessary for operational security, but I could understand how it might feel manipulative from his perspective. I was interested in your work because I care about you, I said carefully. The fact that I have professional expertise in related areas doesn't diminish my genuine concern for your experiences and safety. Dad stepped forward, his expression cycling between confusion and something that might have been embarrassment. Sarah, we need to understand what's been happening here. You let us believe, You thought I had failed, I finished quietly. You thought I couldn't handle military service, couldn't succeed in anything more demanding than processing paperwork for other people's achievements. The words hung in the air like an indictment. Mom's face flushed with what looked like defensive anger, but Dad's expression shifted towards something that resembled recognition of an uncomfortable truth. We were trying to protect you, Mom said, her voice tight with justification. We saw how much you struggled after college, how disappointed you were when things didn't work out the way you'd planned. We thought encouraging more realistic expectations would help you find happiness. Realistic expectations, I repeated, tasting the phrase that had shaped years of family interactions. You mean lowered expectations. You decided I wasn't capable of significant achievement, so you encouraged me to settle for less rather than risk further disappointment. Uncle Frank had been listening from the periphery, his earlier confident dismissal of my military knowledge now revealed as spectacularly incorrect. He cleared his throat uncomfortably before speaking. Well, hell, Sarah, how were we supposed to know? You worked at the VA office, talked about helping veterans with their paperwork. Never said anything about this. He gestured vaguely toward the briefing room where I'd just completed urgent intelligence consultation. Because I couldn't say anything about this, I replied, my patience beginning to fray. My work requires security clearances that prohibit discussing operational details with unauthorized personnel. That includes family members. The explanation was factually accurate, but it only scratched the surface of more complex emotional dynamics. The truth was that I'd found some satisfaction in my family's ignorance, a private vindication that allowed me to pursue meaningful work while they continued to underestimate my capabilities. Their dismissal had hurt, but it had also freed me from the pressure of their expectations and judgments. You could have told us something, Derek said, his voice carrying the weight of years of missed communication. Maybe not the classified details, but something to help us understand that you were more than what we saw. I considered his point carefully. He was right that I could have revealed my security clearances and general nature of my work without compromising operational details. But doing so would have required confronting the family dynamics that had cast me as the unsuccessful sibling who needed protection from her own ambitions. Would you have believed me? I asked, addressing the question to the entire family group. If I'd told you 3 years ago that I'd been recruited for intelligence work, that I was providing cultural analysis for Pentagon operations, would you have accepted that as truth or dismissed it as another unrealistic fantasy? The silence that followed was answer enough. Dad's expression suggested uncomfortable self-reflection, while Mom's defensive posture indicated resistance to accepting responsibility for the assumptions that had shaped our family narrative. General Martinez approached our family gathering, his presence immediately commanding attention and respect. Dr. Garrett, excellent work on the briefing. Pentagon leadership was particularly impressed with your assessment of tribal dynamics and their implications for operational planning. The professional recognition from a brigadier general provided external validation that my family couldn't dismiss or minimize. Martinez's acknowledgement carried the weight of institutional authority that made my expertise undeniable, regardless of personal family dynamics. Thank you, General, I replied, maintaining the professional demeanor that had become second nature during classified briefings. I'm glad the analysis was helpful for mission planning. Martinez nodded, then addressed Derek directly. Lieutenant Colonel, you should know that your sister's intelligence work has supported several operations where Marine units have been deployed. Her cultural expertise has contributed to mission success and potentially saved lives. The revelation added another layer of complexity to Derek's processing of the evening's events. Not only had his supposedly unsuccessful sister been working at senior levels of government intelligence, but her work had directly supported the kind of military operations where his own career was focused. After Martinez departed to rejoin other guests, our family stood in uncomfortable silence, while everyone wrestled with the implications of revelations that had fundamentally altered our established dynamics. The protective assumptions that had governed our relationships for years had been exposed as both incorrect and limiting. 6 months later, I sat across from Derek at a coffee shop near Fort Moore, watching him navigate the menu with the careful attention of someone who had learned not to make assumptions about familiar situations. Our relationship had evolved through a series of difficult but necessary conversations that gradually rebuilt communication on more honest foundations. I got the promotion, Derek said, sliding an official letter across the table. Colonel, effective next month. The promotion board specifically mentioned my operational success record and strategic thinking capabilities. I read the letter with genuine pride, noting the language that emphasized his leadership qualities and tactical innovations. Congratulations, you've earned every bit of recognition you're receiving. I keep wondering, Derek said, stirring his coffee thoughtfully, How much of my success came from intelligence frameworks that you helped develop? It's strange, thinking that my career might have been shaped by your work without either of us knowing it. The question occurred to me as well. Military operations involve complex coordination between intelligence analysis and tactical execution, making it difficult to trace specific contributions to final outcomes. My cultural assessments had likely influenced strategic planning for operations where Derek's units were deployed, but the classified nature of intelligence work made direct confirmation impossible. Your tactical leadership and decision-making abilities are your own, I said carefully. Intelligence analysis provides context and framework, but operational success depends on officers who can adapt and lead effectively in complex situations. Derek nodded, but I could see him still wrestling with questions about the interconnected nature of our professional contributions to military effectiveness. The revelation of my classified work had forced him to reconsider not just his understanding of my capabilities, but also his conception of how military success is achieved through collaborative efforts across different specializations. Mom called yesterday, Derek said, changing the subject to family dynamics that remained complicated despite months of adjustment. She wants to plan a celebration dinner for both our promotions. Seems like she's finally figured out that we're both successful in our own ways. The acknowledgement represented significant progress in family relationships that had required extensive recalibration following the revelation of my hidden career. Mom had gradually moved from defensive justification of past assumptions toward grudging acceptance of realities that contradicted her previous understanding of my capabilities. "How's Dad handling everything?" I asked, knowing that his adjustment had been particularly difficult given his investment in traditional military hierarchies and clear role definitions. "Better," Derek replied. He's been reading about intelligence operations and asking questions about how analytical work supports field operations. I think he's genuinely trying to understand what you do and why it matters. The effort was encouraging, even if it came years after it might have made a difference in our family dynamics. Dad's willingness to educate himself about intelligence work represented a recognition that his previous dismissal of my capabilities had been based on incomplete understanding rather than accurate assessment. My secure device chimed with an incoming message. I glanced at the priority level and recognized routine analytical tasking that could wait until I returned to my secure workspace. The urgent crisis communications that had interrupted Derek's promotion ceremony had become more manageable once Pentagon leadership implemented recommendations from my cultural assessment. "Still saving the world through cultural analysis?" Derek asked, noticing my brief attention to the encrypted communication. "Still providing strategic intelligence that helps operational commanders make informed decisions," I corrected gently. "The world-saving part is a collaborative effort that involves people like you implementing policy decisions based on analytical frameworks." Derek smiled at the correction, recognizing my attempt to emphasize the complementary nature of our different contributions to military effectiveness. Our professional relationship had evolved toward mutual respect based on understanding rather than competitive comparison of achievements. As we prepared to leave the coffee shop, Derek handed me a small wrapped package. "Promotion gift," he explained. "Though I guess I should have been giving you recognition gifts for the past 3 years." Inside was a professional business card holder engraved with Dr. Sarah Garrett, Senior Intelligence Analyst. Below my name was a small inscription, "Excellence Revealed." "Thank you," I said, feeling the weight of acknowledgement that had been missing from family relationships for years. Though the real gift is being able to talk honestly about our work instead of pretending I'm just processing paperwork at the VA office. Derek laughed, a sound that carried relief and genuine affection. Next family dinner should be interesting, with both of us able to discuss our actual careers instead of dancing around classified information and hurt feelings. The prospect of honest family communication represented the most significant change resulting from the revelation of my hidden professional life. For the first time in years, I could participate in family conversations as myself, rather than maintaining a carefully constructed persona designed to match their limited expectations. As I drove back toward my apartment, I reflected on the unexpected path that had led from family dismissal to professional recognition. The years of secrecy had been necessary for operational security, but they had also protected me from confronting family dynamics that needed to be addressed directly, rather than circumvented through deception. My phone rang with a call from Mom, something that had become more frequent as she struggled to rebuild our relationship on foundations that acknowledged my actual capabilities rather than her assumptions about my limitations. "Sarah, honey," her voice carried tentative warmth, "I wanted to ask if you might be free for dinner Sunday. Your father has been wanting to hear more about your work, and I thought we could try again." The invitation represented an opportunity for family relationships that had been impossible, while my professional identity remained hidden. Whether those relationships could develop into something healthier than the protective limitations that had previously defined them remained to be seen. "I'd like that, Mom," I replied, meaning it despite the complicated history that would require ongoing work to address properly. "I'll bring dessert." For the first time in years, the prospect of a family gathering didn't require careful preparation of cover stories or defensive strategies for deflecting attention from my supposed failures. I could simply show up as myself. Drive, Sarah Garrett, senior intelligence analyst, successful professional, and daughter, who had finally been seen for who she actually was, rather than who others assumed she should be. The transformation hadn't erased years of misunderstanding or immediately solved complex family dynamics, but it had created space for relationships based on truth rather than protective deception. Sometimes the most powerful form of justice isn't dramatic confrontation. It's simply the quiet satisfaction of being recognized for your actual worth rather than diminished to fit other people's limited vision of your capabilities. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.